There's a kind of faith that's easy to have, the kind that shows up when the answer comes, when the job offer lands, when the test results come back clear, when the relationship finally heals. In that moment, faith feels natural, almost effortless. You prayed, he moved, and gratitude pours out of you without any effort at all. But there's another kind of faith, a quieter, harder, less talked about kind. The kind you need on the days the answer doesn't come, the days the job doesn't land, the test results stay uncertain, the relationship doesn't heal, at least not yet, and maybe not ever the way you hoped. What do you do with faith then? What does it even mean to trust God in a season where nothing seems to be moving? I want to offer you something tonight that might shift how you see those unresolved seasons. When God solves the problem, you experience his power, but when he doesn't, at least not on your timeline, something else is happening, something just as significant, maybe even more so. In that unresolved space, he's not absent, he's not indifferent, he's doing something different. Instead of removing the mountain, he's building your capacity to climb it. And in doing that, he's telling you something remarkable. He believes you can carry this. Think about that for a second. A parent who does everything for a child never lets that child discover their own strength. But a parent who walks beside a struggling child, who doesn't rescue them from every hard moment, who lets them wrestle with a problem while staying close enough to catch them if they truly fall, that parent isn't being cruel. That parent is trusting the child's capacity to grow. That's closer to what's happening when your prayer isn't answered the way you hoped. It's not that God stopped caring. It's that he sees something in you that you can't yet see in yourself. A strength that's only forged by walking through, not around, the hard thing. A faith that's only deepened by trusting him without the proof of a resolved outcome. If this idea is new to you, or if it's landing somewhere tender tonight, take a moment and hit that like button. It helps this reach someone else who's in an unresolved season right now, wondering if they're being forgotten. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly these nights. Let's sit with the difference between these two kinds of faith a little longer, because I think it matters more than we usually realize. The first kind of faith, the kind that responds to a solved problem, is really a response to evidence. You see the outcome, and you believe because you can see it. That's not wrong, but it's also not the deepest kind of trust available to you. The second kind of faith, the kind that holds steady when the problem stays unsolved, is trust without evidence. It's believing not because you can see the resolution, but because you know the character of the one you're trusting. It's the difference between trusting a friend because they've never let you down, and trusting a friend because you know who they are, even in a moment where circumstances make it look like they might have. This second kind of faith is harder to build, and it's also far more valuable because it doesn't collapse when circumstances get hard. The first kind of faith is fragile, in a way. It needs constant confirmation. The second kind of faith is resilient because it's rooted in relationship, not outcome. Here's something I want you to really hear. An unsolved problem is not proof that you're unseen. It might actually be proof of the opposite. It might be proof that God trusts you with something harder than an easy answer. He trusts you with the process, with the wrestling, with the becoming that only happens in the space between the prayer and the answer. I know this is hard to sit with when you're in real pain. When the unresolved thing is a diagnosis, a broken relationship, a financial crisis, a decision that keeps you up at night, I'm not minimizing any of that. I'm saying that even inside that pain, something is being built in you that could not be built any other way. Let's talk about what it looks like practically to live inside this kind of faith. The first thing is releasing the timeline. So much of our anxiety comes not from the problem itself, but from our attachment to when it should be solved. We've decided, often without realizing it, that if this isn't fixed by a certain date, something has gone wrong. But God's timeline and your timeline are rarely the same, and that gap is not a flaw in the plan. It's often the plan itself. Releasing the timeline doesn't mean giving up hope. It means holding your expectations with an open hand instead of a clenched fist. It means saying, I still believe this can change, and I'm not going to collapse if it doesn't change exactly when I want it to. That posture takes real practice, especially if you're someone who likes control, who feels safest when you can predict outcomes. The second practical shift is learning to ask a different question. Instead of only asking, why hasn't this been solved yet? Try asking, what is being formed in me while this stays unsolved? That question doesn't erase the difficulty, but it changes your relationship to it. It turns you from a passive victim of an unresolved situation into an active participant in your own growth, even inside pain you didn't choose. If you're finding this conversation meaningful, leave a comment and tell me what unresolved thing you're carrying right now. You don't have to give details if you're not comfortable. Even a single word helps me know I'm not just talking into the void, and it helps other people in the comments know they're not alone either. Let's talk about a specific kind of unresolved pain, the kind where you've prayed for years and the answer still hasn't come. Maybe it's a health issue that's dragged on. Maybe it's a relationship that's still estranged. Maybe it's a dream that's stayed just out of reach no matter how hard you've worked toward it. Years of asking, and still silence. I want to say something carefully here, because I don't want to minimize how hard that is. Years of unanswered prayer can wear down even the strongest faith. It can make you wonder if you're doing something wrong, if you're not praying correctly, if God has simply moved on to someone else's request and left yours behind. None of that is true, but I understand why it feels true when the silence stretches that long. Here's what I want you to consider instead. Maybe the years aren't wasted. Maybe they're not evidence of neglect. Maybe they're the exact length of time it takes to build the version of you who can actually carry what's coming. Some blessings would break you if they arrived too early. Some doors would overwhelm you if they opened before you were ready to walk through them steady instead of desperate. This isn't meant to explain away every unanswered prayer with a neat bow. Some things stay mysterious, and I'm not going to pretend I have a tidy answer for every kind of suffering. But I do believe this, deeply. The delay is not proof that you don't matter. It might actually be proof of how much you matter, and how much is being invested in preparing you, even during years that feel like nothing is happening at all. Let's talk about what it means that He believes in you, specifically because that phrase can sound abstract until you let it actually land. Believing in someone means trusting their capacity before they have proven it to themselves. It means seeing potential that hasn't been demonstrated yet and choosing to invest in it anyway. That's what's happening in your unresolved season. God isn't waiting to see if you can handle it before He decides whether to believe in you. He already believes in you, and the unresolved season is where that belief gets to become real, tangible, lived out, instead of just a nice idea. Every day, you keep showing up, keep trusting, keep choosing to hope even without proof. You're proving something, not to Him, but to yourself. That's the quiet gift hidden inside every hard season. You get to discover a strength in yourself that you would never have discovered if the problem had been solved immediately. You get to become someone who can trust in the dark, not just in the light. And that person, the one who trusts without needing proof, is far stronger and far more free than the person who only trusts when things are easy. If you want to hold on to this idea, save this video for the next time you're in a season that feels stuck and share it with someone who's been asking why nothing seems to be changing for them. Sometimes the exact reminder someone needs shows up, not from an answer to their prayer, but from someone else who understands the weight of waiting. Let's talk about comparison again, because it shows up here too, in a specific way. It's easy to look at someone else's solved problem and wonder why yours is still unsolved. Why did their prayer get answered so quickly, while yours has stretched on for years? This comparison can quietly poison your trust, making you feel like you're somehow less favored, less seen, less loved. But every person's timeline is different because every person's formation is different. What one person needs 6 months to become ready for, another person might need 6 years. That's not a measure of how loved you are. It's simply the shape of your specific story, the specific mountain you're being prepared to climb, the specific strength you're being built to carry. Comparing your unresolved chapter to someone else's resolved one will only ever make you feel behind. And you're not behind. You're exactly where your story requires you to be right now. Even if it doesn't feel that way, even if every fiber of you wishes this chapter would hurry up and end. Let's talk about anger for a moment, because I think it deserves to be named honestly. If you're angry at God for not solving something you've begged Him to solve, that anger is not a betrayal of faith. It might actually be a form of faith. You don't get angry at someone you don't believe is real or someone you don't believe is capable of acting. Anger, in this context, is often a distorted form of hope. Hope that hasn't given up even though it's exhausted. You're allowed to bring that anger honestly. You're allowed to say, I don't understand this. I'm frustrated. I feel forgotten. That honesty is not the opposite of faith. It's actually one of the most faithful things you can do because it means you're still in the relationship, still bringing your real self instead of a polished, pretend version of yourself who claims to be fine when you're not. Let's talk about what happens on the other side of an unresolved season, because even though we're focused tonight on the waiting is not the whole story. There does come a day, eventually, when you look back and understand things you couldn't understand while you were in the middle of them. You see why the timing mattered. You see what you needed to become before the door could open safely. You see that the delay, as painful as it was doing something you couldn't have done for yourself. I can't promise you that every unresolved thing will resolve exactly the way you're hoping. Some things change form instead of disappearing. Some grief stays part of your story instead of being erased. But even in those cases, there's a version of peace available that doesn't depend on the outcome changing. A peace that comes from trusting the character of the one who's with you inside the outcome, whatever it turns out to be. That peace is not resignation. It's not giving up on hoping for change. It's holding both things at once, the hope for resolution and the trust that you're held even without it. Those two things can coexist, and learning to hold them together might be one of the most mature forms of faith you'll ever develop. Let's talk about the story of a seed for a moment, because it might help this idea land more clearly. A seed placed in the ground doesn't look like anything is happening for a long time. From the surface, it looks like nothing at all. No movement, no visible change, no sign of life. But underground, the most important part of the process is already underway. Roots are forming, quietly, invisibly, before anything ever breaks through the surface where you could see it. If you dug that seed up too early, hoping to check on its progress, you would destroy it. The very thing that looks like nothing happening is actually the necessary, hidden work that has to happen before anything visible can grow. Your unresolved season might be exactly that. Root work. The invisible, unglamorous, necessary formation that has to happen before whatever you're hoping for can grow strong enough to last. This is why rushing an unresolved season, or resenting it, or treating it as wasted time might actually work against you. Not because the pain isn't real, but because the very thing you're frustrated by might be the process that makes the eventual answer sturdy instead of fragile. A plant that grows too fast, with shallow roots, topples in the first strong wind. A plant with deep roots, formed slowly, underground, in what looked like nothing happening, can withstand storms that would destroy something that grew too quickly. Let's talk about identity again here too, because this matters in a specific way inside unresolved seasons. It's tempting to let your unresolved problem become your whole identity. To start introducing yourself, even just internally, as the person whose prayer hasn't been answered, the person who's still waiting, the person whose situation never changes. But you are not your unresolved problem. You are a person who is, among many other things, currently walking through something difficult, and that distinction matters more than it might seem. When you let the waiting define you entirely, it becomes heavier than it needs to be. But when you remember that you are still fully yourself, still capable of joy in other areas of your life, still allowed to laugh, still allowed to rest, still allowed to experience good days even inside a hard season, the waiting stops swallowing everything else. It becomes one thread in your life, not the entire fabric of it. Let's also talk about the danger of numbing instead of waiting well. When a season stretches on without resolution, it's tempting to numb the discomfort instead of actually sitting with it honestly. Overworking so you don't have to feel the ache. Distracting yourself constantly so the unresolved question never gets space to be asked. These coping strategies aren't evil, but they do rob you of something important, because the honest wrestling, the real sitting with the ache, is often where the deepest growth happens. I'm not telling you to sit in constant pain without relief. Rest and distraction and joy have their place, but don't let them become a permanent avoidance of the deeper conversation you need to have with yourself and with God about what this season is actually asking of you. Sometimes the most spiritually productive thing you can do is simply stop running from the discomfort long enough to ask what it's trying to teach you. There's also something important to say about community here, because waiting alone is so much harder than waiting with support. If you've been carrying this unresolved thing in isolation, afraid that talking about it will make you seem weak, or afraid that people will grow tired of hearing about it, I want to gently push back on that fear. The people who truly love you would rather walk with you through the waiting than watch you carry it alone out of pride or fear. Let someone in tonight, if you haven't already, not to fix it, because most people can't fix it, but to witness it with you, to remind you that you're not imagining the weight of it, to sit with you in the same way you would want to sit with them if the roles were reversed. Isolation makes unresolved seasons feel infinite. Connection, even imperfect connection, makes them feel survivable. One more thing worth naming before we close. Sometimes what feels like an unsolved problem is actually being solved in a way you didn't expect and almost missed because you were so focused on the outcome you originally asked for. You prayed for a specific door to open, and it stayed shut, but a different door, one you never would have chosen or considered, quietly opened instead. You were so fixed on the shape you expected the answer to take that you almost walked past the actual answer standing right next to you. This happens more than we realize. We ask for a very specific outcome because it's the only outcome we can imagine from where we're standing, but the one guiding the story can see further down the road than we can. And sometimes what looks like a closed door is actually protection from a path that would have hurt us in ways we couldn't have predicted. That doesn't mean every unresolved thing is secretly a blessing in disguise, showing up on your schedule with a bow on it. Some things really are just hard, and they stay hard, and the honest posture is to grieve that, not to spiritually bypass it with forced optimism. But it does mean it's worth staying open, worth not assuming the only good outcome is the one you originally pictured, worth watching for the doors that open sideways instead of the one you were staring at head on. Let's also talk about the long view for a moment, because faith like this only really makes sense across a long view, not a single hard week. If you zoom in too closely on one unresolved month, it can feel like nothing ever changes, like this is simply how life is now and always will be. But zoom out, look at your whole story so far, and you'll likely find seasons that once felt permanently stuck that eventually shifted, sometimes in ways you couldn't have engineered yourself. That doesn't erase how real the current stuckness feels. But it does offer evidence, real evidence from your own history, that unresolved doesn't mean permanent. Seasons end, even the ones that felt like they never would. Doors that seemed sealed shut eventually opened, sometimes quietly without fanfare, in ways you almost missed because you'd stopped expecting them. Hold on to that evidence tonight. Not as a guarantee that this exact thing will resolve on the timeline you want, but as a reminder that your story has already shown you, more than once, that unresolved is not the same as unchangeable. Before we close, I want to speak directly to whatever specific thing you're carrying tonight. Maybe it's a relationship that hasn't healed. Maybe it's a health concern that hasn't resolved. Maybe it's a financial pressure that keeps pressing. Maybe it's a dream that stayed dormant for so long you've almost stopped believing in it. Whatever it is, I want you to hear this clearly. The silence you've been sitting in is not proof that you've been forgotten. The delay you've been enduring is not proof that you don't matter. The unresolved chapter you're living inside right now is not evidence that God has stopped believing in you. It might be the clearest evidence yet that He does. So tonight, instead of only asking for the problem to be solved, try adding one more prayer. Ask to become the kind of person who can trust even when it isn't. Ask for the strength to keep showing up honestly in the waiting. Ask to notice what's being built in you, even while you're still hoping for the thing outside of you to change. That prayer doesn't replace your hope for resolution. It deepens it, because now you're not just waiting for an external answer, you're also becoming someone stronger, steadier, more rooted, regardless of when or how the external answer comes. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not less loved because your prayer is taking longer than someone else's. You are being trusted with something that requires real strength to carry, and that strength is being built in you right now, in this exact unresolved moment, whether you can feel it yet or not. If this reached you tonight, like this video, Leave a comment about what you're waiting on right now, even if it's just one word, and subscribe so you'll have this reminder waiting for you the next time the silence feels too long. Thank you for spending this time here with me. Rest well, keep trusting, and I'll see you in the next one.